The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the members and associates of the Victoria Zen Centre to you. If you enjoy it, please be sure to let your friends know about Living Zen. If you'd like to support our community, here are a few ways that you can do it. Download the Living Zen podcast app for iPod, iPhone, or Android. You can also purchase additional Zen Talks by Venerable Eshu on iTunes or Amazon.com. One of the most meaningful ways to show your support is by joining our Sangha as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen podcast and our online e-Zendo will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at www.zenwest.ca and click on the membership tab. Thank you for your support. I want to talk a little bit tonight about resistance. Resistance is something that comes up for all of us. Many of you know I started homeschooling. My wife and I started homeschooling our children about a month and a half ago. And I had an interchange with my son this morning that reminded me of myself when I was a child. And I always remember my father saying that he could never get me into a bath, but he could never get me out of a bath either. And it really struck me that this is very much the way that so many of us go through our lives, go through the experience of our work, of our relationships, and of every aspect of our lives. Always, when we enter into a situation, we have various things built up. We have various expectations about the environment, the experience, the situation, how it's going to play, built up. And also, we have expectations about how we're going to play in a situation. We have these ideas, these images, these beliefs about who we are, what we can do, and that's what we hang on to as I. And when we come into a situation, it's actually very difficult to wholeheartedly, to completely, to cleanly enter into a situation without it being already full of all of these expectations of what's going to happen outside, what's going to happen inside. An example I always like to use is that we've got a bunch of newcomers here tonight. And as human beings, many of us have this really massive expectation of ourselves that we're not going to look like a complete newcomer. And so severe is this sickness, this fear, this concern about not looking like a newcomer, that even if we go into a situation that's completely foreign, even if we go into this crazy situation of a sort of Zen meditation hall that has like 1,001 rules that it takes years for everyone to fully get, and the abbot's always changing them around anyway, so nobody can really get them. We kind of walk in with this expectation that I'm not going to look like a newcomer. Like, I can somehow manage to pull this off and be perceived as kind of proficient at this. And if something happens where we bobble, where we don't bow at the right place, or we have a little bit of numbness in our leg, we're not able to stand up for the walking meditation, we actually get embarrassed. And sometimes people will even stand up in spite of having a leg that's completely asleep, and they fall, sometimes really injure themselves. All because we don't want to look like a newcomer. even if it's our first time. And that fear, that anxiety of not doing it right, of not living up to the image that we have in our own heads about who we think we are, what we should be able to do, keeps us out, prevents us from doing many new things. It actually keeps us out and prevents us from fully engaging in our lives, fully engaging in our work, fully engaging in relationship. We can't truly know what it is to engage in these things unless we're willing to dive in as a baby, completely let go of what it is that we expect, who it is that we think we are, immerse ourselves in the experience of this very moment and see things as they truly are. We have a tremendous fear of this. The fear is of what is unknown. Many of us come to engage in this practice because we've become tired. We've become fed up with our mind behaving in a certain way, our relationships sort of cycling in a certain way. We've become frustrated with our habits at work or at home, and we want change. But what we find as we begin to take up this practice is that this form, engaging in this practice of seated meditation, paying attention to the body, paying attention to the breath, paying attention to the thoughts and emotions that arise in each moment of our lives, we find that we are deeply, deeply creatures of habit. We find that we deeply, deeply are entrenched in ways of doing things. We're entrenched in ways of doing things because they're familiar, because they're comfortable, because we know what to expect when we do these things, because we've done them over and over and over again. When we take up this practice of meditation and we find ourselves paying attention to the breath, not doing anything, not gaining anything, not grasping or acquiring anything, we enter into a space which is completely unfamiliar to us. We enter into a space which can be, for many people, unnerving, uncomfortable. And after a little while of meditation, people start to get really anxious, and they start to say, well, okay, now I'm doing this meditation and I'm able to calm my mind, but what am I supposed to be doing with that? Where am I going with this meditation? Where's this taking me? Start to see all of these sort of old habits asserting themselves. How can we get? What can we do? This practice is aimed at taking us into this very place, this very space of what is unknown. The practice itself could be expressed as the practice of unknowing. As long as we're fixated to I, as long as we're fixated to this person who we think we are, as long as we're stuck on the outcome or the experience or the situation that we figure ought to come here, we can never truly experience this moment, this unfolding activity, which is nothing other than our lives as they are. Always comparing our thought to what has arisen. Always comparing our expectation to what has arisen. Always to what's happening in this very activity. When we do this, we find that we're constantly living in this world of disappointment. We're constantly living in this world of dissatisfaction. Or to use a Buddhist term, dukkha, suffering, misery, anguish. Always moving from one situation to the next situation, finding them just a little bit more uncomfortable than we thought it would be, not quite as good as we figured it ought to be, over and over and over again. When we take up this posture, this very simple practice, all we are asked is to sit up straight, to breathe deeply into our bellies, and allow ourselves to settle in, to immerse, to dissolve into the unfolding activity of this very moment. There's no other place for us to be. There is nothing other for us to do than to manifest clearly in this very moment together with all things. As we sit up straight, open all of our senses, simultaneously we're taking in all of this information, all of this experience in this moment. How is it for us to not add a thought, to not add the judgment, to not add the expectation onto what we're experiencing in this very moment? In Zen practice, we investigate this through the use of questions. How do I manifest the sound of the bell? How do I manifest a flower? How do I become completely unified with these things? How do I let my concern for self, concern for outcome, concern for acquisition, how do I let it drop away and to simply dissolve into the activity that's unfolding in this very moment? This can sound very difficult, and we can get very busy with trying to do something. But Zen practice is not an additive process. As we sit, we allow the mind and the body to settle. We allow the busyness of the day, of our experiences, of our relationships to settle. And little bit by little bit, that momentum, whatever it is that we're chasing, whatever it is that we're running away from, slowly begin to soften, begin to loosen, begin to drop away. And as we continue practice, we find ourselves waking up. We find ourselves home. Home in the midst of this dynamic and unfolding activity. We find ourselves home in the very midst of this activity we call our lives. For once, we can know, not with our heads, but with everything, what it is that I'm talking about when I say there's nowhere else for us to be. This isn't just a concept or a clever phrase. This is something that can be very deeply felt, deeply known, simply through this practice of seated breathing, dissolving into the activity of this very moment. nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.